I've been a real estate agent for 12 years, and what happened to the Morrison family in March 2023 still makes me question everything I thought I knew about neighborhood vetting. What started as a dream home purchase turned into a nightmare that changed how I screen properties forever. The Morrisons, Jake, Sarah, and their 8-year-old daughter Emma contacted me in early March looking for a family home in Ridgeway, a quiet suburban community about 20 miles outside Bakersfield. Jake worked in tech, Sarah was a nurse at Riverside Medical Center, and they wanted a safe neighborhood with good schools. The kind of family every realtor loves working with. I showed them a beautiful 2-story colonial on Maple Avenue, 2847 Maple Avenue, to be exact. Built in 2018, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, with a gorgeous backyard and highly rated Ridgeway Elementary just 3 blocks away. The house had been on the market for only 2 weeks, priced fairly at $485,000. Everything about it screamed perfect family home. The Morrisons fell in love immediately. During our walkthrough on March 15th, neighbors were out working in their yards, kids were riding bikes on the sidewalk, and Mrs. Chen from next door even came over to introduce herself. She seemed lovely, brought homemade cookies and talked about the neighborhood book club. The elderly gentleman across the street, Mr. Patterson, waved from his porch where he was reading his newspaper. "This feels like home," Sarah told me as we stood in the kitchen, watching Emma run around the backyard through the large windows. "The neighbors seemed so friendly." We submitted their offer that afternoon. The sellers accepted within hours. But during the 3-week closing process, I started noticing small things that didn't quite add up. When I drove by the property for the final inspection, I observed the neighborhood dynamics more carefully. Mrs. Chin would peek through her curtains whenever anyone approached the Morrison house. Mr. Patterson seemed to spend an unusual amount of time on his porch, always watching. The couple 2 houses down, the Hendersons, would quickly go inside whenever I pulled up. I mentioned this to my broker, Tom Richards, who'd been in real estate for 30 years. "Some neighborhoods are just protective," he said. "Especially suburban areas. They probably want to make sure the new owners are good people." The closing went smoothly on April 5th. The Morrisons got their keys, and I helped them coordinate with the moving company. Everything seemed normal. Then the calls started. 3 days after they moved in, Sarah called me around 11 p.m. She sounded shaken. "Jennifer, I know this might sound paranoid, but I think someone's been in our house." "What do you mean?" "Little things. A coffee mug I left on the counter was in the dishwasher. Emma's toys were arranged differently in her room. Jake thinks I'm being silly, but I know how I left things." I reassured her that moving stress could make anyone feel disoriented. New house, new routines, it was normal to feel unsettled. But the calls continued. A week later, Jake called during my lunch break. "Jennifer, we need to talk. Someone's definitely been in our house. Our food is disappearing from the refrigerator. Not all at once, just small amounts. A few slices of bread, some leftover pizza, half a carton of milk. Have you checked with Emma? Kids sometimes dash. Emma's 8. She can't reach the top shelf where the missing items were. And yesterday, Sarah found a pillow and blanket in our basement storage room. We haven't unpacked anything for down there yet." My stomach dropped. "Have you called the police?" "We filed a report, but they said without signs of forced entry or significant theft, there's not much they can do. They suggested changing our locks and installing a security system." That afternoon, I drove to Maple Avenue. Something was definitely wrong. Mrs. Chen practically sprinted inside when she saw my car. Mr. Patterson was on his porch as usual, but when I waved, he just stared at me with this odd expression I couldn't read. I knocked on the Hendersons' door. Mrs. Henderson answered, but only opened it a few inches with the chain still attached. "Hi, I'm Jennifer Walsh, the realtor who sold the Morrison house. I just wanted to check if everything's okay in the neighborhood." Her face went pale. Is everything all right with the new family? They're having some concerns about security. I wondered if you noticed anything unusual." She glanced over my shoulder toward the Morrison house, then leaned closer. Can you come back tonight? After dark? There's something you need to see. The way she said it made my blood run cold. I returned at 9 p.m. Mrs. Henderson was waiting by her window and quickly let me in. Her husband Bob was there too, looking nervous. We should have told someone before they moved in, she whispered. But we were scared. Scared of what? Bob pulled back the living room curtain slightly. Watch the Morrison house. Specifically, watch the basement window on the side facing our house. We sat in their darkened living room for 20 minutes. Then I saw it. A faint light flickered in the basement window. Not electric light, more like a small flashlight or candle. It moved around for several minutes, then disappeared. How long has this been happening? I asked. Since the house went on the market 6 months ago, Mrs. Henderson whispered. Even when it was empty. We called the listing agent twice, but she said the sellers were just checking on the property. My mouth went dry. The sellers moved to Portland last September. They gave me the keys in February and haven't been back. The three of us stared at each other in the darkness. There's more, Bob said quietly. Sometimes we see a figure in the backyard at night. Always around 2 or 3 a.m. Someone small and thin, moving between the trees. I called Jake immediately. You need to get your family out of that house tonight. Don't pack, don't hesitate. Just leave. What's going on? Someone's been living in your basement. Probably for months. The neighbors have been watching it happen, and I think they know more than they're telling me. There was silence on the line. Then I heard Sarah screaming in the background. Jennifer, I have to go. Sarah found something. The line went dead. I called 911 and raced back to the Morrison house. 3 police cars were already there, lights flashing. Jake met me at the front door, his face white as paper. They found a room, he said shakily, behind the water heater in the basement. Sarah went down to check the circuit breaker, and she noticed the basement was smaller than it should be based on the house's footprint. Officer Martinez filled me in on what they'd discovered. Someone had constructed a hidden space behind the basement's back wall, accessible through a panel that looked like part of the original foundation. Inside was a small living area with a sleeping bag, food storage, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment. Whoever was staying here had been watching your clients, Martinez explained. We found photos of them taped to the walls. Pictures of them moving in, of their daughter playing in the yard. This person had been documenting their daily routines. But the most disturbing discovery was a notebook filled with detailed observations about the Morrison family's schedules, habits, and personal information that could only have been gathered through extended surveillance. The really concerning part, Martinez continued, is that we found similar notebooks about previous families. This has been going on for years. As we talked, Mrs. Chen finally approached us. She looked terrified but seemed ready to talk. We knew someone was living in these houses when they went on the market, she admitted. It started about 3 years ago. Different houses in the neighborhood, always when the families moved out and before new ones moved in. We tried calling police before, but they said without proof of break-ins or theft, they couldn't do much. Why didn't you warn the new families? She looked ashamed. We were afraid. Afraid of getting involved, afraid of what this person might do if they knew we were watching. We thought, we hoped, maybe they'd just move on. The investigation revealed that someone had been systematically targeting vacant houses in the neighborhood for temporary residence, then staying hidden when new families moved in until they could find another vacant property. The level of planning and surveillance suggested this wasn't random criminal behavior. The Morrison family stayed in a hotel that night while police processed the scene. They ended up breaking their lease and moving to a different city entirely. I don't blame them. But what haunted me most was the realization that an entire neighborhood had been living in fear, watching this happen, and no one had found a way to stop it or protect incoming families. 3 days later, we discovered this was just the beginning of something much larger. What's the most unsettling thing you've discovered about your neighborhood after moving in? Have you ever felt like you were being watched in your own home? Vaccine cache. 3 weeks after the Morrison incident, I thought I'd seen the worst of what could happen to new homeowners in our area. Then Dr. Lisa Rodriguez called me, and I realized the hidden room discovery was just the tip of something much more disturbing. Lisa was a nurse practitioner who'd recently relocated from Phoenix to take a position at Clearwater Medical Center. She contacted me in late April looking for a small house with enough space for a home office where she could do telehealth consultations. As a single professional, she wanted something quiet and private but close enough to the hospital for emergency calls. I showed her a charming 1950s ranch house at 1247 Oak Street in Brookside, about 15 minutes from Ridgeway. The property had been vacant for 8 months after the previous owner, an elderly man named Harold Winters, passed away. His estate was eager to sell, and the house was priced to move at $295,000. The timing seemed perfect. Lisa needed to be settled before starting her new position in June. The property sat on a large lot with mature trees, excellent privacy, a detached 2-car garage, and an old wooden shed in the back corner that had clearly seen better days. Lisa fell in love with the character and privacy during our first walkthrough. The house had original hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, and large windows that filled every room with natural light. "This feels perfect," she told me as we explored the backyard on April 28. "I love having space to organize my work materials without disturbing neighbors. That shed would be ideal for storing medical supplies and equipment I can't keep at the clinic." Lisa was particularly excited about the shed because as a nurse practitioner, she often needed to maintain personal stocks of certain supplies for home visits and emergency situations. The previous owner had apparently used it as a workshop, and it still contained some of his tools and workbenches. The closing went smoothly on May 15. Lisa moved in over the weekend with help from her brother who drove up from Los Angeles. I helped her coordinate with contractors to update the bathroom and convert the smaller bedroom into her home office where she could conduct telehealth appointments and handle administrative work. Everything seemed perfectly normal for the first week. Lisa was settling in well, getting to know her neighbors, and preparing for her new job. She'd introduced herself to Mrs. Garcia next door and Mr. Thompson across the street, both of whom seemed friendly and welcoming. Then Lisa called me on a Tuesday evening around 9 p.m., sounding puzzled and slightly concerned. "Jennifer, this might sound weird, but I think there's something strange about my shed. When I was out there this afternoon organizing my medical supplies, I noticed the floor feels hollow in certain places, and there's a section near the back wall that sounds completely different when I walk on it." "What do you mean exactly?" "Well, I'm used to assessing structural issues from my previous house, and this doesn't feel like normal wooden flooring over a foundation. It's almost like there's empty space underneath. And when I was moving some of the previous owner's leftover tools, I found that several floorboards in the back corner aren't actually nailed down properly." I felt that familiar sense of dread creeping in, remembering the Morrison case and the hidden room they'd discovered. "Have you looked underneath those loose boards?" I lifted them up just a little to investigate, and Jennifer, there's a trapdoor underneath with a metal ladder going down into what looks like a finished underground room. I can see electric lighting down there, and I can hear refrigeration units running, that distinctive compressor sound. My stomach dropped. "Lisa, please tell me you haven't gone down there." "Not yet. I wanted to call you first. But I'm really curious now, especially since I can see it's clearly a professional installation. This isn't some old root cellar or storage pit. Someone built this intentionally, and it's been maintained recently." I told her to wait for me before investigating further, and that I'd be there within 30 minutes. During the drive to Oak Street, my mind was racing with possibilities, none of them good. The Morrison case had taught me that hidden spaces in residential properties were rarely innocent. When I arrived at Oak Street, Lisa met me at her back door looking nervous but determined. She led me through her yard to the shed, which looked completely ordinary from the outside, just a typical old wooden structure that you'd find on dozens of properties in the area. Inside, Lisa showed me where she discovered the loose floorboards. When we lifted them completely, we revealed a well-constructed trapdoor with a sturdy metal ladder leading down into what was clearly a purpose-built underground facility. "I brought flashlights," Lisa said, handing me one. Are you ready for this? We climbed down the ladder into what turned out to be a sophisticated underground storage facility. The space was larger than I'd expected, probably 15 by 20 feet, with professional electrical wiring, fluorescent lighting, advanced climate control systems, and multiple pharmaceutical-grade refrigeration units lining the walls. But what filled the room made both of us stop and stare in complete shock. Thousands upon thousands of COVID-19 vaccine vials, perfectly organized by manufacturer and lot number on custom-built shelving systems. Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, all the major brands, stored at proper temperatures with detailed inventory logs showing dates, batch numbers, expiration dates, and serial numbers. This is incredible, Lisa whispered, examining the labels with her medical training. These are completely legitimate vaccines, not counterfeits or expired doses. But why would someone stockpile this quantity in a private residence? We found comprehensive shipping manifests and purchase orders indicating regular deliveries over the past 2.5 years. The paperwork showed orders placed through various medical facilities, pharmaceutical distributors, and healthcare networks, but the quantities were far beyond what any single practice or even small hospital would typically need. Computer workstations in the corner contained detailed database records of a sophisticated distribution network. The previous owner, Harold Winters, had apparently been collecting vaccines from multiple sources during the height of the pandemic, some through legitimate medical channels, others through more questionable procurement methods. But what made this discovery even more disturbing was evidence that the operation had continued seamlessly after Harold's death in September. Recent computer entries, shipping receipts, and inventory updates showed someone else had taken over the facility and was actively using it to store and redistribute vaccines during shortage periods. Look at these transaction records. Lisa pointed to recent sales data on one of the computer screens. They were charging premium prices, sometimes 3 or 4 times the normal cost, to private clinics, concierge medical practices, and wealthy individuals who wanted to bypass official distribution channels during peak demand. The financial records showed hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue from vaccine sales during 2021 and 2022, when official supplies were limited and people were desperately seeking access to vaccines for themselves and their families. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was an extensive surveillance system that had been monitoring not just the Oak Street property, but actively tracking local medical facilities, healthcare networks, and their vaccine distribution schedules throughout the region. Someone had been systematically studying delivery patterns, shipment schedules, and inventory levels at hospitals and clinics, then strategically diverting portions of those shipments to build this private stockpile while communities faced critical shortages. The recent logs show they knew I was a medical professional before I even contacted you, Lisa said, reading through surveillance files with growing alarm. There are detailed notes about my background, my previous employment, my professional contacts, and plans for recruiting medical staff and expanding distribution network through new healthcare contacts. The surveillance records included photos of Lisa during our property walkthrough, notes about her daily routines since moving in, and detailed assessments of her potential value to their operation based on her medical credentials and access to healthcare systems. We immediately called federal authorities, as this clearly involved interstate commerce, healthcare fraud, and potentially violations of emergency distribution regulations. FBI agents arrived within 2 hours, followed by specialists from the DA and Department of Health and Human Services. The investigation revealed this was part of a massive vaccine trafficking operation spanning multiple states and involving millions of dollars in diverted medical supplies. The underground facility in Brookside was just one storage and distribution hub in a sophisticated network designed to exploit emergency healthcare systems during the pandemic. Federal agents spent 4 days cataloging evidence and recovering inventory. Over 18,000 vaccine doses were seized from the Oak Street facility alone, many still viable and immediately redistributed to local health departments and community clinics that had been experiencing ongoing shortages. Lisa moved out the following week, too shaken by the discovery that she'd been specifically targeted and that someone had been planning to recruit her into their illegal operation. The surveillance records showed they had been monitoring her daily routines, professional contacts, and work schedule since the day she moved in. What terrified me most was realizing this was directly connected to the Morrison case. Both properties had been systematically identified and targeted for their privacy, layout, and suitability for concealed criminal operations. Someone was using our local real estate market to identify and exploit residential properties for large-scale illegal enterprises. The federal investigation expanded rapidly as agents traced the network's connections throughout California and neighboring states. They discovered that the criminals had been monitoring real estate transactions, specifically targeting properties purchased by healthcare professionals or properties with features suitable for hidden storage facilities. 2 weeks later, we discovered the network was even larger and more sophisticated than anyone had imagined, and that a third operation was already in the final stages of launching something that would make the previous discoveries look like small-time operations. Have you ever questioned where critical medical supplies disappear to during shortages? What would you do if you discovered your property was being used as a hub for illegal operations that were profiting from public health emergencies? 2 months after the vaccine trafficking bust, I thought our community had seen enough underground criminal operations to last a lifetime. Then Marcus Thompson contacted me in early July, and I discovered that sometimes the most terrifying situations don't involve human criminals at all. Marcus was a software engineer who'd recently accepted a remote position with a tech company based in Seattle. He contacted me looking for a quiet house where he could work from home without distractions, preferably something move-in ready since he needed to start his new job immediately and couldn't afford renovation delays. I showed him a beautiful 1970s split-level house at 3156 Cedar Lane in Westfield, about 20 minutes from the previous incident locations. The property had been completely renovated by house flippers who'd purchased it 6 months earlier from an estate sale. Everything was updated: new electrical, plumbing, HVAC system, hardwood floors, modern kitchen, and fresh paint throughout. "This is exactly what I need," Marcus told me during our walkthrough on July 8th. "Clean, quiet, and ready for me to set up my home office immediately. The basement would be perfect for my computer equipment, since it stays cool naturally." The house was priced at $385,000, slightly above market value but justified by the extensive renovations. Marcus was particularly impressed by the soundproofing work the flippers had done: thick insulation, quality windows, and solid construction that would eliminate outside noise during his video conferences and development work. The closing happened quickly on July 22nd. Marcus moved in that weekend with minimal furniture since he'd sold most of his belongings before relocating from Austin. He was eager to establish his workspace and start his new position the following Monday. Everything seemed perfect for the first few days. Marcus set up his computer equipment in the basement, established his home office in the main bedroom, and settled into his remote work routine. The house was indeed quiet and peaceful, exactly what he'd wanted. Then Marcus called me on Thursday evening around 11 p.m., sounding exhausted and frustrated. "Jennifer, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I'm having some issues with the house that are affecting my work performance. There are noises coming from inside the walls, constant scratching, scurrying sounds, and what sounds like movement throughout the entire structure." "What kind of noises exactly?" "It's hard to describe. Scratching sounds like claws on wood. Rapid movement behind the drywall. Sometimes it sounds like things falling or rolling around inside the walls. It's happening 24 hours a day, but it's worse at night when everything else is quiet." I suggested he contact an exterminator, thinking it might be mice or squirrels that had gotten into the attic during the renovation work. Old houses often had pest issues that became apparent after new residents moved in and changed the environment. But Marcus called back the next day sounding increasingly distressed. "Jennifer, this isn't a normal pest problem. I called 3 different exterminators yesterday, and they all said the same thing: they can hear the sounds, but they can't find any obvious entry points or evidence of infestation." "What do you mean?" "No droppings, no visible damage, no obvious holes or gaps where animals could be getting in." The exterminators were baffled. They said the sounds are definitely coming from inside the wall cavities, but they couldn't explain how animals would have gotten in there or why there's no other evidence. Over the next week, Marcus's calls became more frequent and concerning. He was losing sleep due to the constant noise, having difficulty concentrating during work calls, and becoming increasingly paranoid about what might be living inside his walls. "I'm starting to hear patterns in the sounds," he told me during one particularly disturbing conversation. "Like the scratching follows specific routes through the house. It starts in the basement walls, moves up to the main floor, then travels through the ceiling to the second floor. It's almost like there are established pathways." Marcus had started documenting the sounds with recording equipment, trying to map their patterns and intensity throughout different times of day. He'd also begun sleeping with earplugs and white noise machines, but nothing could completely block out the constant activity within the walls. "I'm starting to wonder if I'm losing my mind," he admitted during a call 2 weeks after moving in. "The sounds are so consistent and widespread that it seems impossible, but I know I'm not imagining them. My work performance is suffering because I can't sleep or concentrate." That weekend, I decided to visit the house myself to assess the situation. When I arrived at Cedar Lane on Saturday morning, Marcus looked terrible dark circles under his eyes, visibly exhausted, and clearly stressed about his deteriorating living situation. "Listen," he said, leading me into the living room. Within minutes, I could hear exactly what he described: scratching, scurrying, and movement sounds coming from multiple locations within the walls. The activity was constant and seemed to travel throughout the entire structure. "This is definitely not normal," I admitted. "Let me contact the renovation company and see if they encountered any issues during their work that might explain this." When I called Bradley Construction, the company that had flipped the house, the owner Tom Bradley sounded immediately uncomfortable when I described the situation. "Oh no," he said quietly. "We were hoping that problem had been resolved during the renovation." "What problem?" "When we first started demo work, we discovered evidence of a significant rodent infestation. Not just a few mice, we're talking about dozens, maybe hundreds of rats that had been living in the wall cavities for years. The previous owner had apparently ignored the problem, and they'd established extensive tunnel systems throughout the entire structure." My heart sank. "What did you do about it?" "We hired a professional pest control company to eliminate the infestation before we started reconstruction. They assured us the problem was completely resolved. We sealed all entry points, treated the entire structure, and even replaced some of the framing where damage was extensive." But as Tom continued explaining, I realized they might have created an even worse situation. During the renovation, they'd installed new insulation, sealed gaps and cracks, and essentially created a more contained environment within the wall cavities. "It's possible," Tom admitted reluctantly, "that we didn't eliminate all the rats before sealing up the walls. If any survived the initial treatment, they would now be trapped inside the structure with limited access to food and water sources." The implications were horrifying. Marcus wasn't dealing with a normal pest infestation, he was living in a house where dozens of rats were potentially trapped within the walls, becoming increasingly desperate and aggressive as their situation deteriorated. We contacted Dr. Sarah Kim from the County Health Department, who had helped with previous investigations. She arrived with a team of pest control specialists equipped with thermal imaging cameras and acoustic detection equipment. What they discovered was worse than anyone had imagined. The thermal imaging revealed extensive movement throughout the entire wall system, dozens of heat signatures moving through interconnected pathways that had been established over years of habitation. "This is one of the most severe rodent infestations I've ever encountered," explained Jim Rodriguez, the lead pest control specialist. "These rats have created a complete tunnel system throughout the house. They're not just living in the walls, they've essentially built a parallel structure within your structure." The acoustic detection equipment revealed the true scope of the problem. The rats weren't just randomly scurrying around, they had established specific routes, feeding areas, and nesting sites throughout the wall cavities. The constant noise Marcus had been hearing was an entire ecosystem of trapped animals becoming increasingly desperate. "The renovation work accidentally created the perfect storm," Dr. Kim explained. The rats lost their external food sources when the property was vacant, but they couldn't escape because the renovations sealed their normal entry and exit points. They're now trapped inside a contained environment, which is why the activity is so intense and constant. The removal process took 3 weeks and required partially demolishing sections of walls throughout the house. The pest control team removed 47 rats from within the wall cavities, along with extensive nesting materials, food caches, and damage to insulation and wiring. These animals had been living in survival mode for months. Jim Rodriguez told us after the extraction was complete. Their behavior had become increasingly aggressive and erratic due to stress, hunger, and confinement. That's why the sounds were so intense and disturbing. Marcus moved into a hotel during the remediation process and ultimately decided not to return to the house. The psychological impact of knowing what had been living within his walls, combined with weeks of sleep deprivation and stress, made it impossible for him to feel comfortable in the space. But the most disturbing discovery came during the final inspection of the removed rats. Several showed signs of having consumed materials that shouldn't have been available within sealed wall cavities, synthetic substances that suggested they had access to areas beyond what anyone had mapped. Some of these animals had been feeding on materials that indicate they may have had access to neighboring properties as well, Dr. Kim informed me privately. The tunnel system may extend beyond the boundaries of Marcus's house. A broader investigation of the neighborhood revealed that the rat infestation had spread through underground utility corridors and shared foundation spaces to at least 3 adjacent properties. The problem Marcus had discovered was just the most obvious manifestation of a much larger issue affecting the entire block. As I helped Marcus coordinate his move to a different property, I couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was connected to the previous incidents in our area. Someone had been monitoring real estate transactions and might have deliberately chosen houses with known problems for their criminal operations, knowing that distracted homeowners dealing with pest issues would be less likely to notice other suspicious activities. 3 days later, federal agents contacted me with information that confirmed my suspicions and revealed that our community had been systematically targeted by the criminal network in ways we were only beginning to understand. Have you ever wondered what's really living inside the walls of your house? What would you do if unexplained sounds in your home turned out to be something far worse than you'd imagined? 3 months after the rat infestation discovery, I thought I'd finally encountered every possible nightmare scenario for new homeowners in our area. Then I received a call that made me realize sometimes the most dangerous residents aren't the ones hiding in basements or walls, they're the ones who moved in by design. The call came from Detective Morrison on October 15th, around 6 p.m. on a Friday evening. His voice was tense in a way I'd never heard before. "Jennifer, we need to talk about a property you sold earlier this year. The custom build on Hillcrest Drive. Do you remember working with a client named Patricia Kellerman?" My blood went cold. I remembered Patricia very well. She'd contacted me in February looking for a specific type of lot where she could build a custom home. Middle-aged, well-dressed, claiming to be a retired security consultant who wanted to design a house that would maximize privacy and security features. "What's happened?" "We've arrested Ms. Kellerman on multiple charges of stalking, harassment, and invasion of privacy. Her house wasn't built for security, it was built for surveillance. She's been systematically monitoring and documenting the private lives of every family in her neighborhood for the past 6 months. Patricia had seemed like an ideal client when she first contacted me. She had excellent credit, substantial cash reserves, and clear specifications for what she wanted. She needed a corner lot with elevated positioning, minimal obstructing vegetation, and specific orientation requirements that she claimed were important for solar panel efficiency and natural lighting. I'd found her the perfect property at 2489 Hillcrest Drive in Summit Ridge, a prestigious neighborhood of executive homes where lots started at $150,000. The elevated corner position offered commanding views in multiple directions, exactly what Patricia said she wanted for her retirement sanctuary. "I've spent my career in corporate security," she'd explained during our first meeting. I understand the importance of situational awareness and environmental control. This house needs to be designed so I can monitor my surroundings effectively and ensure my personal safety. Patricia worked with a custom home builder to create a unique design that seemed perfectly reasonable for someone concerned about security. Extra large windows positioned strategically throughout the house, a second-story deck that wrapped around two sides of the building, and what she called a monitoring room on the third floor that would serve as her home office. The construction process took 8 months, and Patricia was involved in every detail. She insisted on specific window placements, sight lines, and even the height of landscaping elements that might obstruct views from her property. I assumed she was just extremely detail-oriented about her security concerns. Patricia moved into her completed custom home in September, and everything seemed normal. She was quiet, kept to herself, and maintained her property meticulously. The neighbors occasionally mentioned seeing her on her deck or in her windows, but she seemed like a harmless retiree enjoying her new home. Then the complaints started reaching local police. Multiple families in Summit Ridge reported feeling like they were being watched. Detective Morrison explained. Parents noticed someone observing their children's play schedules. Homeowners felt uncomfortable in their own yards. Several people reported seeing camera equipment and telephoto lenses pointed at their properties from the Kellerman house. The investigation began when Mrs. Angela Foster, who lived directly across from Patricia's house, noticed that her family's daily routines were being documented with disturbing precision. Angela's teenage daughter Emma had started receiving anonymous messages that included details about her school schedule, after-school activities, and social plans that no stranger should have known. The messages weren't threatening exactly, Detective Morrison continued, but they demonstrated knowledge of private family information that could only have been gathered through systematic surveillance. Details about personal conversations held in private homes, schedules of when families left for work or school, even information about personal habits and relationship dynamics. When police obtained a search warrant for Patricia's house, they discovered what Detective Morrison described as the most sophisticated private surveillance operation he'd encountered in 20 years of law enforcement. Patricia's custom home had been specifically designed as a surveillance platform. Every window was equipped with high-powered telescopic cameras. The third floor, office, contained professional-grade monitoring equipment connected to wireless cameras that she'd secretly installed on neighboring properties. She had live feeds from inside multiple homes, Detective Morrison told me. Cameras hidden in mailboxes, landscaping, outdoor light fixtures, any location that gave her access to private spaces. She'd been watching families eat dinner, monitoring children's bedrooms, recording private conversations between spouses. The scope of Patricia's surveillance network was staggering. She had detailed files on 17 different families within a 4-block radius. Each file contained hundreds of pages of observations, photographs, recorded conversations, and behavioral analysis that read like psychological profiles. She documented everything. Detective Morrison continued. When people woke up, what they ate for breakfast, marital arguments, children's emotional states, financial discussions, personal phone calls, months of intimate details about their private lives. But Patricia's surveillance wasn't random or purely voyeuristic. She had been selling this information to various clients through encrypted online platforms. Private investigators, divorce attorneys, debt collectors, and what appeared to be identity theft operations were paying substantial amounts for detailed intelligence about specific families. She was running a commercial surveillance business using her custom home as the operational base. Detective Morrison explained. Her security consultant background gave her the technical knowledge to create this system, and her real estate choices gave her the perfect platform to implement it. The financial records seized during the search revealed that Patricia had earned over $180,000 in the 6 months since moving into her custom home. She charged clients between $500 and $2,000 per week for detailed surveillance packages on specific families, with premium rates for intimate personal information or compromising material. Some of her clients were using the information for blackmail purposes. Others were building identity theft profiles. Several were divorced spouses seeking custody advantages or evidence for financial settlements. The breadth of criminal activity stemming from Patricia's surveillance was still being investigated. The really disturbing part, Detective Morrison told me, is how she selected her targets. She had been monitoring real estate transactions throughout the region, identifying families that met specific criteria for her surveillance business. Patricia had been tracking home purchases by families with children, high-income professionals, people going through life transitions like job changes or recent marriages, anyone whose personal information might be valuable to her various clients. She chose that specific lot and designed that house because it gave her optimal surveillance positioning for the neighborhood she wanted to monitor. Detective Morrison continued. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, it was a systematic business plan that required months of preparation. The investigation revealed that Patricia had been operating similar surveillance businesses in other cities before relocating to our area. She would establish herself in a community for 2 to 3 years, build her client network, then move to a new location when the operation became too well known or risky. She's done this before, Detective Morrison confirmed. We found evidence of previous operations in Phoenix, Denver, and Portland. Same methodology: custom home positioned for optimal surveillance, professional equipment, commercial client networks selling private family information. The impact on the Summit Ridge neighborhood was devastating. Families discovered that their most private moments had been recorded and sold. Children learned that their daily routines had been monitored by a stranger. Parents realized that personal conversations about finances, relationships, and family problems had been documented and potentially shared with unknown parties. Several families are considering moving, Detective Morrison told me. They feel like their privacy has been permanently violated. Even with Patricia arrested, they can't shake the feeling that someone might still be watching. The legal ramifications extended far beyond Patricia herself. The information she'd gathered and sold had enabled numerous other crimes: identity theft, stalking, blackmail, and harassment cases that were now being traced back to intelligence she'd provided to various clients. Federal authorities took over the case due to the interstate nature of Patricia's previous operations and the complexity of tracking all the criminal activities stemming from her surveillance business. The FBI was working to identify and prosecute her clients while attempting to notify all the families whose privacy had been violated. As Patricia's real estate agent, I was questioned extensively about the home buying process and whether I'd noticed any warning signs. Looking back, her specific requirements should have raised red flags, but they seemed reasonable for someone genuinely concerned about personal security. She manipulated the entire real estate process to create the perfect surveillance platform, Detective Morrison explained. From lot selection to custom home design, every decision was made to optimize her ability to spy on her neighbors. The case forced our entire real estate community to reconsider how we evaluate clients with unusual property requirements. Patricia had seemed like a dream client: knowledgeable, well-funded, and specific about her needs. In reality, she was a predator who used the real estate market to position herself for criminal activity. 3 weeks after Patricia's arrest, federal agents informed me that her surveillance records contained references to the previous incidents in our area: the Morrison House Watcher, the underground vaccine operation, and even Marcus's rat-infested house. She had been monitoring and documenting all the criminal activities in our region, potentially as intelligence to sell or as leverage for her own protection. She may have known about the other operations all along. An FBI agent told me during our final interview. Her surveillance network was so comprehensive that she was probably aware of criminal activities throughout the entire area. The realization that Patricia had been watching everything: the hidden rooms, the underground laboratories, the surveillance networks, while using that information for her own criminal enterprise, was perhaps the most chilling discovery of all. As I helped federal agents understand the real estate transactions that had enabled Patricia's operation, I couldn't escape the feeling that our entire community had been systematically infiltrated and exploited by criminals who understood exactly how to use legitimate systems for illegal purposes. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in your own home? What would you do if you discovered that your privacy had been systematically violated and sold to strangers for months without your knowledge? For months after Patricia Kellerman's arrest, I thought I understood the full scope of surveillance crimes affecting our region. Then Rebecca Martinez called me in November, and I discovered that sometimes the watchers and the watched are part of the same terrifying network. Rebecca was a financial analyst who'd recently divorced and needed to relocate quickly due to a restraining order against her ex-husband. She contacted me in late October looking for a furnished rental or lease-to-own property where she could establish a safe, independent living situation while rebuilding her life. "I need something move-in ready," she explained during our first phone conversation. "I can't stay in the same city as my ex-husband, and I need to establish residency here quickly for legal reasons. Privacy and security are my top priorities." I found her a perfect property at 1847 Birch Way in Greenwood, a quiet residential neighborhood known for young professionals and single residents. The house was a contemporary two-bedroom that had been completely renovated and was being offered as a furnished lease-to-own by an investment company called Meridian Properties. The property was immaculate modern furniture, updated appliances, smart home technology throughout, and comprehensive security features including keyless entry, motion sensors, and what the landlord described as a state-of-the-art monitoring system for tenants' safety and property protection. "This is exactly what I need," Rebecca told me during our walkthrough on November 2nd. "Everything's already set up, the security features will help me feel safe, and I can move in immediately without having to buy furniture or deal with utility connections." The lease terms were unusually favorable: below market rent, flexible payment options, and the possibility to purchase the property after 18 months if Rebecca decided to stay permanently. The landlord, represented by a property management company called Secure Living Solutions, seemed eager to find a responsible tenant quickly. Rebecca signed the lease on November 5th and moved in that weekend with just her personal belongings and clothes. She was relieved to have found such a perfect solution to her housing crisis and was excited about starting fresh in a new community. Everything seemed ideal for the first 2 weeks. Rebecca established her home office, started working remotely for her new employer, and began settling into neighborhood routines. The house's smart home features were convenient, and the security system made her feel protected after months of fear about her ex-husband's threats. Then Rebecca called me on a Wednesday evening, sounding confused and increasingly paranoid. "Jennifer, I'm probably being overly cautious because of everything I've been through, but I'm having some strange experiences in the house that are making me uncomfortable." "What kind of experiences?" "It's hard to explain without sounding crazy. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched, even when I'm alone inside with all the doors locked. And I've noticed that items in my house are occasionally moved or arranged slightly differently than how I left them." I suggested she contact the property management company to check if maintenance staff had been entering the property for any reason. Sometimes rental properties had scheduled inspections or service visits that tenants weren't properly notified about. But Rebecca called back the next day sounding more distressed. "Jennifer, I don't think this is a maintenance issue. I set up a test yesterday. I arranged objects in very specific positions and marked their locations. When I came home from work, several items had definitely been moved." "Have you contacted the landlord?" "I called Secure Living Solutions, but they said no one has accessed the property since I moved in. They suggested I might be experiencing stress-related disorientation from my recent divorce and relocation. But I know I'm not imagining this." Over the next week, Rebecca's concerns escalated. She started finding evidence that someone had been in her house while she was at work: different temperature settings on the thermostat, kitchen items used and cleaned, even indications that someone had been using her computer and personal electronics. "I changed all my passwords and enabled two-factor authentication on everything," she told me during an increasingly frantic phone call. "But somehow my email accounts, social media, and even my banking information seem to be accessed by someone else. I'm getting notifications about login attempts from devices I don't recognize." Rebecca had started working from coffee shops instead of her home office because she felt uncomfortable using her personal electronics in the house. She was also having trouble sleeping, convinced that someone was monitoring her daily routines and personal activities. "I know this sounds paranoid," she admitted, "but I feel like someone knows my schedule, my habits, even my personal conversations. It's like living in a fishbowl where I can't see who's watching." That weekend, I decided to visit the property myself to assess Rebecca's concerns. When I arrived at Birch Way on Saturday afternoon, Rebecca looked exhausted and stressed, clearly struggling with the situation. "Let me show you what I've discovered," she said, leading me through the house. "I've been doing my own investigation, and I think the smart home technology might be more extensive than we were told." Rebecca had been documenting unusual features throughout the house that she'd initially dismissed as normal smart home equipment. But as she showed me around, I began to see what she meant. There were an unusual number of small electronic devices integrated into light fixtures, smoke detectors, electrical outlets, and decorative elements throughout every room. More than what would typically be necessary for basic smart home functionality. "Look at this," Rebecca said, pointing to a small device mounted inside a ceiling light fixture in her bedroom. "This isn't a standard smart bulb or motion sensor. It's some kind of camera or recording device." Using a flashlight, we began systematically examining the electronic equipment throughout the house. What we discovered was horrifying sophisticated surveillance equipment disguised as normal smart home technology in every single room, including bathrooms and bedroom areas. "There are cameras and microphones everywhere," Rebecca whispered, her voice shaking. "Someone has been watching and listening to everything I do in this house. Every private moment, every personal phone call, every aspect of my daily life." We found recording devices hidden in alarm system components, listening equipment integrated into the sound system, and cameras concealed in smoke detectors, air vents, and even decorative wall art. The entire house had been designed as a comprehensive surveillance environment. "This explains everything," Rebecca said, tears starting to form. "Someone knows my schedule because they're watching me leave and return. They know my passwords because they're recording me typing. They know my personal information because they're monitoring all my phone calls and computer activities." I immediately called Detective Morrison, who arrived within an hour with a team of technical specialists. What they discovered during their investigation was one of the most sophisticated residential surveillance operations any of them had encountered. The house had been specifically renovated by Meridian Properties to create what Detective Morrison described as a complete surveillance environment designed to monitor and record every aspect of a tenant's private life. The smart home features weren't for convenience or security, they were elaborate camouflage for illegal surveillance equipment. "Every room has multiple cameras and microphones," Detective Morrison explained after the technical team completed their initial assessment. "Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, office, nowhere in this house is private. Someone has been recording everything Ms. Martinez has done since the day she moved in." The surveillance data was being transmitted wirelessly to external servers, meaning that Rebecca's private life had been broadcast in real time to unknown parties throughout her entire tenancy. The technical specialists estimated that hundreds of hours of intimate footage and audio recordings had been captured and transmitted. "This wasn't just voyeurism," Detective Morrison continued. "This was systematic data collection for criminal purposes. Someone was harvesting personal information, financial data, passwords, social security numbers, private conversations, everything needed for identity theft and fraud." The investigation revealed that Secure Living Solutions was a front company operated by the same criminal network responsible for the previous incidents in our region. They had been systematically targeting vulnerable individuals, recent divorcees, domestic violence survivors, people in financial distress who needed housing quickly and might not thoroughly investigate rental properties. They specifically marketed to people in crisis situations who would be grateful for immediate housing and less likely to ask detailed questions about the property features. Detective Morrison explained. "Ms. Martinez wasn't randomly selected, she was deliberately targeted because her situation made her an ideal victim." The surveillance operation had been running for over 2 years, with dozens of previous tenants who had unknowingly lived in the monitored environment. The criminal network had been collecting massive amounts of personal data that they used for identity theft, financial fraud, blackmail, and other criminal enterprises. Some former tenants had their entire identities stolen, Detective Morrison told us. Bank accounts emptied, credit cards opened in their names, personal relationships destroyed through blackmail. The surveillance data gave the criminals everything they needed to completely destroy people's lives. Rebecca's case was particularly valuable to the criminals because her divorce proceedings involved significant financial assets, and her ex-husband's restraining order created opportunities for harassment and intimidation using the surveillance footage. They'd been selling intimate recordings of Ms. Martinez to her ex-husband, Detective Morrison revealed. He's been using the surveillance data to track her daily routines, monitor her personal relationships, and gather evidence to use against her in their legal proceedings. The realization that her abusive ex-husband had been watching her most private moments through the hidden cameras was devastating for Rebecca. She had moved across the state to escape his control, only to discover that he had been monitoring her new life through the surveillance network. Federal authorities took over the investigation due to the interstate nature of the criminal enterprise and the complexity of the surveillance technology involved. The FBI discovered that Meridian Properties owned dozens of similar surveillance houses throughout California, Arizona, Nevada, and Oregon. This is a massive criminal operation, an FBI agent explained during the briefing. They've been systematically targeting vulnerable individuals, collecting their personal data through illegal surveillance, then using that information for various criminal purposes including identity theft, fraud, stalking, and blackmail. The technical specialists required 3 days to remove all the surveillance equipment from Rebecca's house. The amount of recording devices hidden throughout the property was staggering: over 40 cameras, 30 microphones, and numerous data collection devices that had been monitoring everything from internet usage to personal conversations. Rebecca moved out immediately and relocated to a different state where federal authorities could provide better protection while the investigation continued. The psychological impact of discovering that her most intimate moments had been recorded and shared was traumatic beyond what anyone should have to endure. She thought she was escaping an abusive situation, Detective Morrison told me afterward. Instead, she was delivered directly into an even more sophisticated form of abuse and exploitation. The investigation revealed connections to all the previous criminal activities in our region. Patricia Kellerman had been a client of the surveillance network, purchasing data about families in her neighborhood. The underground laboratory operators had used similar surveillance techniques to monitor their properties. Even the Morrison House watcher had connections to the broader criminal enterprise. This entire region has been systematically infiltrated by an organized criminal network, the FBI agent explained. They've been using real estate transactions, property rentals, and residential surveillance to create a comprehensive intelligence operation that supports multiple illegal enterprises. As the investigation expanded, federal authorities discovered that our local real estate market had been deliberately manipulated by criminals who understood exactly how to exploit legitimate housing transactions for illegal surveillance and data collection purposes. The scope of the criminal network was still being uncovered when I realized that everything we'd experienced, from hidden rooms to underground laboratories to surveillance houses, had been part of a coordinated operation that had been targeting our entire community for years. Have you ever wondered if your smart home technology might be watching you? What would you do if you discovered that your most private moments had been recorded and sold to strangers? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.